VR is in a really weird place right now, and this week kinda proves it. You've got Meta cutting one of their biggest investments so far, hackers unlocking PSVR2 features Sony didn't, a new headset spec leak while another is getting cancelled, and somehow more people than ever are actually using VR. So yeah, a lot to get through, let's get into it. So Meta just pulled one of the weirdest yet I think beneficial moves I've seen in a while. They straight up announced they were fully dropping VR support for Horizon Worlds. Yeah, their big metaverse play down the drain. So here's the good news and also the bad news. This kinda came out of the blue, and especially for world creators that poured huge chunks of time betting on Meta's vision coming true, it's a bummer. Thankfully, after the backlash this news got, Meta went back and said they'd continue supporting existing worlds, though my guess is that any kind of monetization will be off the table. But to be fair, even this whole situation happening in the first place says a lot about where Meta is heading. So here's the bright part to all of this. No one really liked Horizon Worlds, not users getting their entire quest plastered with random low-quality worlds, and definitely not developers that lost precious screen space on the Meta Quest store. So if this is Meta finally realizing they've been forcing the wrong thing and maybe shifting focus towards stuff people actually want, that's a win. Because Horizon Worlds shouldn't be the thing carrying VR. Good games and experiences built by passionate developers should. And while Meta is figuring out its priorities, the PlayStation VR2 is finally getting the full feature set on PCVR. But not thanks to Sony. The PSVR2 has basically been jailbroken for PCVR users. Now you could already use PSVR2 on PC with Sony's official adapter, but it always felt like a cut down version of it. No proper eye tracking, no HDR, no headset haptics, you were missing out on a lot of what actually makes the PSVR2 special. But now the team behind PSVR2 Toolkit says they've managed to unlock some of those features. Specifically things like the headset haptics and even access to the eye tracking camera feed, which is the first step to enabling full dynamic foveated rendering. And that's a pretty big deal because before this, their stuff worked more like a modified driver, not entirely integrated into OpenXR. So this could be the first real step towards getting a full PSVR2 experience on PC, not just a watered down version. Now in terms of how well things like haptics will work, we'll have to see, because on the PS5, developers are the ones who implement how this feature behaves. Honestly, I'm hoping Sony sees the hype surrounding this PSVR2 jailbreak and decides to finally stop gatekeeping these features for users who prefer PCVR over using it with the PS5. And speaking of hardware getting better, here's a quick one, but this is an interesting leak. According to Chinese outlet VR Coast, Meta's next headset, codenamed Pheonix, will use 2560 by 2560 micro OLED displays from SIA Technology. Now we knew this was gonna be a micro OLED headset and their first non-LCD headset since the original Quest. But these displays could be the same one used in the Big Screen Beyond and Beyond 2, which can be both a good and a bad thing. Meta is known to make some of the best VR lenses in the business. So if they improve on what Big Screen did by having better lenses and cooling, all the drawbacks of these screens could be essentially fixed. It would mean better contrast, deeper blacks, and a much sharper image overall. Now, this is still a leak, and parts of the report are already being disputed, by Big Screen of all companies. But if the core of it is accurate, then this is a direction I totally approve of for Meta. And if you zoom out of all of this for a second, Meta says 2025 was actually a record year for Quest. At GDC, they confirmed the platform hit its highest ever number of unique users, and more than 100 apps made over $1 million on the store last year. They also said overall store revenue was up slightly year over year, even without a new headset launch. And that's important because usually new hardware is what drives spending, and we didn't have any last year. So while VR still isn't fully mainstream, this does suggest the ecosystem is getting more stable, and developers are actually making real money. Alright, numbers are looking good, but let's briefly talk about what actually brings and keeps people in VR: the games. The VR Games Showcase is officially coming back on March 24th, and they're teasing a pretty stacked lineup of announcements with a mix of new reveals and updates. As the name suggests, it's fully focused on VR games, which we honestly don't get that often and I want more of. So if you've been waiting for actual game news instead of just hardware talk, this is probably the one to watch. And speaking of games, this one's been a bit messy, but the end result is actually pretty great. Luke Ross, one of the most well-known VR modders, has made almost all of his VR mods completely free. This comes after a lot of controversy around how these mods were being monetized, after CD Projekt Red sent a DMCA takedown letter to the modder, and his response wasn't an easy pill to swallow for the community. Now to be fair, Luke did end up getting dragged through the muds a bit too much for what is realistically his own hard work. Was it fair to paywall the mods? Probably not. But should he be able to make money from his work? absolutely yes. Now there is one big exception. The Cyberpunk 2077 mod that started all of this is actually not included, but everything else is now freely available, with new titles still being released to his paying patrons first, but then joining the list of free mods a couple of months later, which is a pretty big shift from the previous gated subscription model. The list of games includes things like Atomic Heart, Avatar, Dark Souls, Doom, Far Cry 4, 5, and 6, and a lot more. But not all news this week is great. Lynx, the French XR startup behind the Lynx R1, has entered liquidation, meaning the company is sadly shutting down. And with that, the upcoming Lynx R2 is effectively dead in the water. The R2 was supposed to be a follow-up with ambitious mixed reality features and serious improvements over the R1, but the company failed to secure more funding, which sucks because even if the R1 didn't take off, it was still one of the more interesting attempts outside of the big players. My honest hope is that the Lynx team won't completely give up on VR, and hopefully we'll hear from them again in the future. Alright, this next one is actually a very unexpected collab. Nvidia and Apple are basically teaming up to bring something called foveated streaming to the Vision Pro. And the term might sound familiar because it's what Valve's Steam Frame is going to be using. In short, instead of rendering everything at full quality, it only fully renders what you're directly looking at using eye tracking. Apple and Nvidia are showing this off with two pretty serious sims: iRacing and X-Plane. So you're basically getting high-end PCVR wirelessly with eye-tracked optimization. And honestly, that alone is already pretty cool. But the really crazy part is what Apple brings to this. Because with Vision Pro's mixed reality, you can actually see your real-world setup, like your racing wheel or flight controls inside the game. So instead of guessing where buttons are, you just look down and they're there. Fully visible, fully usable, while still being immersed. And yeah, you can kinda do this on something like a Quest, but it's more like a flat cutout, not a proper dynamic mixed reality blend like this. So if this actually works well, it might be the first real example of mixed reality adding something meaningful to hardcore PCVR. And finally, a small upgrade that hints at something bigger. Nvidia just bumped GeForce Now in VR up to 90 FPS when streaming to headsets like the Quest 3, Pico 4, and Apple Vision Pro. So if you've used it before, this should feel noticeably smoother. But just to be clear, this is still not VR game streaming. You're streaming regular PC games onto a virtual screen inside your headset. So yeah, not full PCVR without a PC, because unfortunately a few stutters on flat screen have very different consequences than stutters in VR. But honestly, if this keeps improving, that future might not be as far off as it sounds. Though latency and the quality of the user's internet connection is not something that's easy to solve. So we'll have to see if we ever get a reliable method to play PCVR without a PC. Wink wink, looking at you, Steam Frame. So yeah, VR is in a weird spot right now. Some things are clearly improving, some things are falling apart, and some stuff is just confusing. But overall, it does feel like things are slowly moving in the right direction. And sometimes it's better to cut your losses and focus on what matters, even if it hurts at first. Let me know which one of these stories you think actually matters the most in the comments. Check out these videos next if you want to hang out, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, guys!